In this Blender tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create these 3 procedural marble materials. Now, if you'd like to purchase the project files and also help to support me, you can do that over on my Gumroad and Patreon with the links in the video description. Huge thank you to Sketchfab for sponsoring this video. Sketchfab is an awesome 3D model site where you can upload, buy, and sell 3D models and assets. One of my favorite features of Sketchfab is that you can upload and view your 3D models in your browser and even view them on your phone or tablet. Sketchfab also has a huge 3D model store where you can purchase 3D models and assets for your 3D work. You can also apply to become a seller on the platform. Be sure to check out Sketchfab with the links in the description. So in this tutorial, we're going to be creating 3 different procedural marble materials. So the first one here that we're going to be creating is this white one here, and this is a pretty basic standard one. And I have these cubes here with a bevel added, and that way you can see what the material would look like if it were used for something like a kitchen scene or something like that, or like a tabletop or a flooring or something like that. Because for most things that you're going to be using this for, you probably wouldn't actually use it for just a sphere, but I like a sphere as well to preview the material. So we're going to be creating this white one here first, and this is a pretty standard typical marble material. Then we're going to be creating this other one here, and this is kind of a dark one with some little light bits, and you can see if you zoom way in, there's a lot of little detail in there. And here's what it looks like if it were going to be used for like a tabletop in a kitchen scene or something like that. And then right over here, we're going to be creating this third one as well, and this one has a lot more detail. If I zoom in here, you can see it has all that little noise there, and so those little white areas, and it also has a little bit of detail right in there in the black. And then again, here's what it looks like if it were on like a tabletop or something in some kind of architecture scene or something like that. All right, and before we start, I did just want to show you the setup that I have. So I have these 3 cubes here, and I just kind of scaled them down, and I added a bevel modifier on them so that it has a smooth edge. And then I just have these icospheres here, which when I added the icosphere down here on the settings, right behind me, when you add an icosphere, there'll be those little settings, and I just turned these subdivisions up to a pretty high amount so that they were very smooth. And then I just added a camera, and I put the camera right there so that you can see the objects. And then as far as the lighting goes, I added this Autoshop 01 1K HDR on HDRI Haven. There will be a link in the video description if you'd like to download the same HDRI that I'm using. So I just downloaded the 1K version. So I just added this HDRI as an environment texture into the world, and then I just left the strength at 1. And I think it gives some really nice lighting for these marble materials. And then before we start, make sure you have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, because that's a really great add-on for working with nodes. If you don't have that enabled, you can go edit and go to preferences, and then click on the add-ons right here. And then right here on the search, you can start typing in node, and then just checkbox the Node Wrangler and then close this. And I'll also have timestamps in the video description if you just like to make one of the materials. Let's get started. So I'm just going to select this, and I'm going to click on new, and I'm going to call this Marble Light, okay, because we're going to be making the light one first. And then what I'm going to do is right here, I'm going to click on this and drag it and drop it down here. And that way, when I go into rendered mode, we can preview the material, and these are both going to have the same material. You can see if I change the color, they're both going to have that material. So as we build the material, we can preview what it's looking like. All right, so this first light marble material is actually going to be pretty easy to make. We're going to press Shift-A, and I'm going to search for a noise texture. Just click on the noise texture and drop it right here. So using one of the features of the Node Wrangler, I'm going to click on this noise texture and make sure it's selected, and then I'm going to press Control-T. So what Control-T does is it's going to add this mapping and texture coordinate, and what I'm going to do is plug this object up to the vector. And that way this noise texture is going to be placed around the object more evenly. Now, using another feature from the Node Wrangler, if we hold down the Control and Shift key while we click on nodes, it's going to add this viewer node, and we can preview just what that node is seeing. So I can just hold down the Control and Shift key and click on these different nodes to preview what it's seeing, but I'm just going to click on the noise texture because that's what I want to see. All right, so I'm going to leave everything to the default except the detail. The detail I'm going to turn to the max, which is 16. And you can see if I zoom in here, it's kind of subtle. You can't really see it because of how gray and light it is, but there is now a lot more detail in that texture. Now, if I plug this noise texture factor up to the base color and then hold down the Control and Shift keys and click on the principled, you can see what it's looking like. Doesn't really look like marble yet. What I want to do is I actually want to distort this so that it acts a little bit more like marble. So what I can do is I can click on this noise texture, press Shift D to duplicate it, and drop it right behind here in between the mapping and texture coordinate. And as you can see, it's warping that texture. So now instead of just looking like a noise texture, it looks a lot different. If I Control Shift and click on this, you can see now that's what it's doing. And already I think this texture looks a lot more like marble. So now I'm just going to Control Shift click on the principled, and you can see this is what it's looking like. Now right now it is still pretty light and gray, so I want to change those colors a bit. So I'll press Shift A, search for a color ramp, and then just drop this color ramp right in here. And then I actually want to switch these, so I'm going to put the white over here, this white tab. So just click on the white tab and put it somewhere around here. And then the black one, I'm going to kind of move it till it's more over here, and you can see now that marble material is a lot darker. Now this black here, I actually want to make it a very, very slight blue. You can make it any color that you want, like if you want to have green marble or brown marble or something like that. I just want to have a very, very slight blue, so I'm going to change it to kind of a bluish grayish color and then make it very dark. So it still looks pretty black, but it just has a very, very slight blue color right in there. Alright, so that is looking a lot better, but I think that the texture is a little bit too detailed right now. So what I can do is over on this noise texture, the one that's going through the texture coordinate, the scale here, I'm going to turn this to like 2, and that way now the texture is a lot bigger. Alright, so it's looking a lot like marble, but it needs to be a lot more shiny because marble is very shiny. So you can see over here on the principled, this roughness value, I'm just going to turn this way down and it'll be a lot more reflective. And I'll turn it down to something around a 0.1, something like that, maybe just a little bit more, like a 0.15. Let me just try that. 0.15. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And you can see that now it's reflecting those different lights there from the HDRI. All right, now before we finish this material, I just want to add a little bit of bump. So let me just drag these over so we have a little bit more room. I want to take this color and plug it into the normal so that we have just a tiny little bit of bump. Now when we plug that in, something is wrong here, and you can see there's like those shading issues. That's because this is a yellow one and this is a purple one. So this is color data and this is normal data because it's purple. So we need to actually add a node to convert that. So to convert it, we'll press Shift A. I'm going to search for a bump node and then just drop the bump node right in here. And then this actually needs to go up to the height. So the color to the height and then the bump to the normal. Now, if you look at it, you can see that it looks really rough now and really bumpy, and marble is pretty smooth, but I think it does look a little bit nicer if it just has a very, very subtle roughness, but that's way too big. So we need to turn this strength way down. So I'm actually going to turn the strength to 0.02, and that way it's just very, very subtle. You almost can't see it because marble is very, very shiny and smooth. But if you zoom in here really close, you can see there's just a tiny bit of roughness. You may even want to turn this down to a 0.01 if you want to, but I think that looks pretty good. It just adds a little bit more detail to this material. And that's the material. So it's actually pretty simple and easy to make, and I think the result looks pretty good. All right, so let's move right over here to the middle one. I'm just going to select this, and we're going to add a new material. And I'm going to call this material Marble Dark. So we're going to start off kind of making it similar to the other one, but then we're going to change it a bit to make it look dark and make it look better for the dark material. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for another noise texture. Just drop it right here. And then the detail size, I'm going to turn that all the way up to 16 and then leave everything else how it is. So I also want this material to be on this bottom one right here. So what I can do is just drop color it. So I can just drag this, drop it over, and then drop it on there. And now we can preview the material on the sphere as well as the cube. All right, now remember with the Node Wrangler add-on, if you select a noise texture or any other texture and you press Ctrl T, it's going to add this texture coordinate and mapping. And then the object, I just want to plug this up to the mapping, and that way the noise texture is going to be placed around the objects a little bit better. And then once again, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to select this noise texture, press Shift D to duplicate it and drop it over on this one. And then the scale here, I'm going to change this to 2. So now if we plug this factor here into the base color, you can start to see what it's looking like. And so far it looks pretty similar to this material. What I want to do though for this material is add some very, very fine small detail. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to press B and box select all of these nodes. and just kind of move them up, and then I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate them and bring them down. And then I'm going to hold down the Control and Shift key using the feature from the Node Wrangler and just click on this, and now we can preview it. And then what I'm going to do for this bottom one is the scale here. I'm going to change this to 200. So now it's way more detailed, and if you zoom in here, you can see it's really detailed. But because this noise texture right here is plugged through the texture coordinate and mapping, it's warping it and making it look a bit more like marble. So I can Control Shift and click on this one, and you can see here is the larger detail, and then if I Control Shift and click on this one, here is the more fine detail. So what I want to do is I want to add these together. But before I mix them together, I do want to play around with the colors, because right now they're both just a light color and I want to make them dark. So I'm actually going to box select these and just move them over so we have a little bit more room, and then I'll press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a color ramp. Just drop the color ramp node right there. And then this factor here, I'll plug this up to the factor on the color ramp. And then I also want that same color ramp to be on this one. So if I Control Shift and click on the principled BSDF, then I can select this color ramp, press Shift D to duplicate it, and just drop it right here. And then it will plug it up into the principled. So let's first work with the top color ramp. So I'm going to first select this black one, and I'm going to plug this black tab over to somewhere right here. Then this white tab, I'm going to select it and kind of move it over here and just kind of put it somewhere about here. You can see that when I add more or less, it's going to get stronger or less strong. Like if I move it really close here, you can see that white is really strong. But if I move it way down, you can see it's starting to fade out a little bit. So I like it somewhere around here. And then I want there to be a little bit more gray. So I'm going to click on the plus to add a new tab. And this tab I want to be pretty close to the black one, somewhere around here. And then I'm going to make it, if I just zoom out, I'm going to click on this color right here. And I'm going to change the color of the tab and just make it a bit more gray colored. So now if I Control Shift and click on this, you can kind of see what it's doing. So this black one here, it's making everything black, and you can kind of push this in to the amount that you want. And then this gray one here, it's adding more gray. But then this white one here, just those light parts, the really light parts of the texture, it's making that even brighter. And then the gray is kind of going around the white. And then one more thing that I'm going to do, this black one here, I'm going to click on it, go to the color, and then move my mouse up here and just scroll wheel 1 up, and that way it'll just bump it up a little bit. You could even go 2. I'm just going to go 1, and that way it's not fully black. It's just very, very slightly gray, but it's mostly black. All right, so let's go do this bottom color ramp now. So I will Control, Shift, and click on the bottom color ramp right here. And for this one, I'm going to switch these. So I'm going to put the white over here and the black over here. Just put the black one somewhere around here. You can see if I bring it bigger, there's going to be more black, and if I bring it farther this way, there's going to be less black. So I'm just going to bring it somewhere around here. And then this white one here, I'll just bring it kind of over here, and I'm going to change this to a gray color. So click on the color right here and just make it gray, kind of a light gray, something like that. And then I want to add one more, so I'll click on the plus here to add another one. If I just zoom in here, you can see what it's doing. So it has the black, and then it's going to gray, and then to lighter. This one, I'm going to bring this one a little bit more towards the black and make it a little bit darker. So just click on this. If you're zoomed way in and you click on this, you're not going to be able to see it because it's too big. So if you just zoom out, then you can just make this a little bit darker. All right, so just a little bit darker. There we go. And you can see this is what it's looking like. All right, so now we have this texture and this texture. So I want to now mix these two together. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to search for the Mix RGB because we want to mix the colors together. So I'm going to click on this and then just drop it right here. And then I'm going to take this color and put it into color 2. And then this one here is in color 1. Now, if I Control Shift and click on it, you can see what it's doing. So I'm just going to leave this set to mix because I think that looks pretty good. So what it's doing is it's taking this very small texture and mixing it with the bigger texture. And if you want to, you can also play around with the factor. So if you turn the factor all the way over here, it's just going to be the bigger texture. And if you turn the factor all the way up to 1, it's going to be the small texture. I like to leave it somewhere in the middle, but you can play around with it. So now I can Control Shift and click on this, and you can see there's the texture. Now you can see that it's not very shiny, so just like the other material, the roughness, I'm going to turn this way down to something like a 0.15, so that's very shiny. And because we added that HDR for the lighting, it's adding some very realistic lighting, and it's adding in all those little reflections and stuff, and that really helps to make it feel more photorealistic. So we're almost done with this material. The last thing that I want to do is just add another bump and just make it very, very subtle. I just think that it helps a little bit. So this color here, I'm going to drop this color into the normal. And then once again, just like with the first material, we need to convert it to normal data. So I'm going to press Shift A, search for a bump node, drop the bump node right in here. And then this color needs to go into the height. And then the purple needs to go into the purple. And now that is converting it to normal data. Now the strength is way too large right now. If you kind of zoom in here, you can see that really doesn't look good. It's just really bumpy. So we need to turn this strength way down. And for this one, I'm going to turn it to like a 0.01, and that makes it very, very subtle, and you may not really notice anything because it's so subtle, but if you zoom way in, you can see there's just a tiny little bit of detail here, sort of like if you were in a kitchen and there's like a marble surface and you were to just rub your hand over it, you might just feel some very, very subtle noise. It's very subtle because marble is pretty shiny, but I do think that it helps to make it look a little bit better. So there we go, there is the second marble material. So I'm just going to head over here to the third one, just click on this, and then I'll click on new. And this one, I'm going to type in marble swirl because it kind of has some swirl. So marble swirl. And then I'm also going to click on this and drag the material over to here so these both have the same material. Now let's do this last marble material. So I'm going to press Shift A, and this time I'm going to click on the search, and instead of adding a noise texture like the other ones, I'm going to add a Voronoi texture, and I'm going to start with that. So I'll add that in right there. And then just like we did for the other ones, I'm going to click on this, and using the feature from the Node Wrangler, I'm going to press Control T with that selected, and that'll add those, and then I'll just plug the object up to the vector. Now if I Control Shift and click on it, you can see what it's doing. And then instead of this being F1, I'm going to change this to distance to edge. And you can see that now it adds all these cracks right here. And then the scale here, I think I want to turn this up to about 8. And that way everything is scaled down just a little bit. Now right now this doesn't really look like marble, so what I'm going to do is use a similar technique to what we did for the other ones. So I'm going to press Shift A, search for a noise texture, and this time I'm going to drop the noise texture right here before the Voronoi going through the vector. And you can see that now it adds noise to that mapping, and you can see that now our Voronoi texture has a bunch of noise and it looks a lot more interesting. Now right now the scale is a little bit too big, so I'm going to change this to somewhere around a 1.6. I think that looks a little bit better. And then the detail right here, I'm going to turn this all the way up to 16. And you can see that now we have tons of detail in that texture. Now to add even more detail, what you can do is you can actually turn up the roughness here on the noise texture. So if I just turn this up maybe to somewhere around a 0.7, you can see that now it adds even more detail. All right, so now let's plug this distance here into the base color and Control Shift click on the principled, and you can see what it's looking like. So I want to make it a lot darker because this marble material is dark. So once again, I'll press Shift A and search for a color ramp. Drop the color ramp right in here. And then this black one, I'm going to just pull it out a little bit. I think I'll actually Control Shift and click on this while we're editing it so we can see it a little bit better. So I'll just pull the black out a little bit. And then this white one, I'll pull to about here. And then I'll make it a little bit more gray. Just because if it's fully white, that's a little bit too bright. So I'm just going to make it a little bit more gray. And then I want to add one more because I want to kind of have a gray in between the black and the white. So I'll click on the plus right here and I'll just leave that about where it is. And I'm going to make this even more gray, a little bit darker, something like that. So you can see that now most of it's black, some of it's gray, and then just a few little parts are white. Maybe I just pull this over. It's not actually white, it's a very light gray. But if I pull this over, you can start to see that there's even more white just in the lightest areas. All right, that looks very good. So I'm going to Control Shift and click back on the principled and we can see what this is looking like. So that's very good for our base, but we don't have all those little cracks and swirls. So now I'm going to add all those white little streaks and white cracks. So what I'm going to do is press B for the box select these nodes and just move them up so that we can make our next texture right down here. So I'm going to press Shift A and search for a wave texture. Just drop the wave texture underneath the noise, and then we can actually use the same texture coordinate and mapping. So I'm just going to plug the vector right up to this vector because they're really just the same thing, so we can just use the same nodes for this one as well. I'm going to Control Shift and click on the wave texture so we can preview what it looks like. Now the scale here, I think I'm going to turn this to somewhere around 3. I'm going to turn up the distortion to somewhere around 22. I think that looks pretty good. And then the detail, I'm going to turn this all the way up to 16 because I like to add as much detail as I can. All right, and that looks pretty good. So now let's play around with the colors. So I'll press Shift A, search for a color ramp node, and just drop the color ramp node right here. And then what I want to do is these lines here, or these swirls or cracks, I want to make those light, and then I want to make everything else dark. So I can click on this and pull it way down, and you can see that now it just shows those little white areas. And then this is really contrasty, so I want to add something in the middle so that it kind of has a fading point, so it goes from black to gray to white. So I'll click on this plus here to add a new one. So this one is going to actually be overlapping this one here, this tab, but I'm just going to turn it really, really close. Just zoom way in and make it really close. And then this gray here, I'm going to turn it down. And you can see that when I turn it down, now it has black and then gray and then white right there. And if I zoom out, you can see those white parts are actually a little bit too thick. So I'm going to zoom way in here and pull this gray one super, super close. And that way that white little part right there is going to be even thinner. And then to make it even thinner, the gray tab, you can make this a little bit darker, and that way they're going to be even smaller and there's going to be more black. I just want them to be pretty thin. I don't want them to be very big. So just like that. All right, so this is cool, but you can see that all of these are kind of rotating like this because before we added all that distortion, the wave texture was kind of starting up here and it was going in circles around right here. And so what I want to do is add some more of these and mix them together so that there are some different lines going different directions. Because like you can see this one, all the lines are kind of going back and forth, and this one, all the lines are kind of circulating around the circle. So to do this, I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to box select the texture coordinate and mapping as well as the wave texture and color ramp. I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate them and just move them down here. And maybe I'll just reorganize this a little bit. Okay, that looks a little bit nicer. So how I rotate these streaks here is I'm going to zoom into this mapping, and the rotation Z, I'm going to start to turn this up. And you can see it doesn't look like anything's happening. That's because I need to Control, Shift, and click on this. And now if I start to turn this up, you can see that it's rotating around. So I'm just going to turn it up to something that I like. And then you could also change the X and the Y. So just kind of rotate it around. So you can just play around with these values and change it to the rotation that you like, but I'm just going to actually turn the X and Y both to 0, and then turn the Z value to somewhere around 238. And that way you can see that now they're kind of rotating over like this. So now we have this one and we have this one. So what I want to do is actually mix these two together. So to do that, I'm going to press Shift A and search for the mix RGB. Just drop it right here. And then this color, I'm going to plug this one up to color 1. And then this one, I'm going to plug up to color 2. And then if I Control Shift and click on the mix, you can see it's adding them together. And what I'm going to do is turn this mix to add. And that way you can see it's a little bit brighter because when it's set to mix, it's just kind of blending these together. So one of them has to be a little bit faded. So I'm going to change this to add. And now you can see it's just adding both of them together on top of each other. So now you can see we have this swirly texture right here, and then if I Control Shift and click on this, we have this base texture right here. So I want to mix them together. So I'm going to use this same node right here and just mix it the way that I've mixed these. So I'll press Shift D to duplicate this add, drop it right here, and then this color is going to go to color 1, and this one is going to go to color 2. And then if I Control Shift and click on this add, you can see what it's doing. Now what I want to actually do is take this factor here and turn it down a little bit because I want these swirly bits to be even more subtle because you can see right here they're actually pretty bright. So I'm just going to turn this down a bit just because I really don't want them to be super bright, because if they're too bright, they're just going to look way too strong and they're going to just stand out way too much. So I'm just going to turn it down and just make it more subtle. So it's still there, you can still see it. But if I change this to somewhere around a 0.25, you can see that now it's a lot more subtle. And that actually looks really cool. That is a really cool texture. All right, so let's Control Shift and click on the principled, and you can see there it is. So once again, this roughness here, I'm going to turn this way down. So I'm just going to turn this down to like a 0.1, something like that. You could turn it down even more if you wanted, but I feel like that's a little bit too shiny. But if you turn it up too much, you can see that definitely looks too rough. So somewhere around 0.1 or 0.2, something like that looks pretty nice. For this one, I think I'm actually going to turn this to somewhere around a 0.2. I think I just like that a little bit better. And then one last thing before we finish this, just like the other materials, I want to add a very, very slight bump. So I will click on this color, drop it into the normal. Now we need to convert this because this is yellow, which is dealing with color, and this is purple, which is dealing with normal. So I'm going to press Shift A, search for a bump node, drop the bump node right in here, and then the height I need to take the color, put that up to the height instead of the normal, and then this normal is going to go down into this normal. Now the strength here is way too strong again. You can see that's like really bumpy. So I'm going to turn the strength way down to something around a 0.01. So it's very, very subtle because marble is pretty shiny and smooth. But you can see if I zoom way in here, there's just some very, very slight bump. Like right there, you can kind of see it. This is a little bit smoother and then that's a little bit more rough. So there we go. There is the finished swirly marble material. So there we go, there is the 3 marble materials. So you now have 3 really nice marble materials that you can use for your projects. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope it was helpful. And again, if you'd like to help support me, you can purchase the project files for this tutorial from my Gumroad and Patreon. Links will be in the description. Thank you for watching and I will see you in a future video.